Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Our next candidate is Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, we thank you for being here. Welcome you here. I'll explain the interview process to you. Each board member will ask 2 questions. We expect the interview process to take 60 to 90 minutes. We ask that you answer the questions as thoroughly and concisely as possible. And if there's a board member absent, I'll ask the question for them.
Yes, sir.
First question I'll start with, and just kind of get us going. Give us a brief description of your background and why you're interested in our director of school position.
Yes, sir. So, I'm a product of Sumner County Schools. I attended Beach Elementary, T.W. Hunter Middle School, White House High School. I grew up in the hallways of Henderson, what's Ellis Middle School now. Went to my first football game when I was 3 days old, and I don't think I missed another one until I went to college. I went to band concerts, plays, proms, everything imaginable, and I was raised by a generation of Sumner County administrators, and I hold that very dear to my heart. Like many of my generation, my parents were both school teachers, and they weren't necessarily because of pay and things like that. They encouraged me to do something else, so I joined the Army. I went to the United States Military Academy for 3 years. Then I tore up my back my junior year, had surgery, was honorably medically discharged, and went to MTSU, got married, majored in political science. Then I went to Emory University, and I was in a PhD program studying post-communist transitions to democracy, comparative politics. I did that for 3 years. The job market in higher ed at that point, there was one job for Russian studies in the nation. You have to be way more arrogant than I was to imagine that I could land that one job. And so I started teaching. I got a job in Atlanta 4 days before we found out that we were pregnant with our first child, which turned out to be wonderful because we had insurance. And I taught 4 years at Forest Park High School in Clayton County, Georgia. It's just on the other stone's throw from the Atlanta airport, Hartsfield International Airport. It was a wonderful experience. Our school had kids from 45 nations that spoke 55 languages. So diverse, about 99.9% free and reduced lunch. Huge economic disadvantage community, but a beautiful community. And I learned so much. I coached mock trial. I was head of student government. I taught AP U.S. history, economics, U.S. history, world geography. Loved every second of it. After that, I got called. During that time, I got called into the ministry. So we left in 2003, moved to Waycross, Georgia, right on top of the Okefenokee Swamp, and I pastored there for a while. We stayed in Waycross until about 2006, and then we moved back to Nashville. In 2009, 2008, 2009, I taught for a year at Pioneer Christian Academy before it closed, and then went back to White House High School, my alma mater, and taught English there. Taught AP English Literature and Standard and Inclusion English 3. Then I coached football there, coached wrestling. Then I went over to White House Middle School as assistant principal, and I was there for about 3 years. And then I came back to White House High School as principal from 2014 through 2018. And then I came up here in 2018, and I've been in the central office since 2018. I have a deep love for Sumner County. I have a deep love and commitment to the students and teachers of Sumner County. And I would like to be able to continue the great things that we've built over the last 10, 12 years and be able to take that and take it to the next level, because I think we've got the greatest group of teachers and administrators and leaders that we've had in my lifetime. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to interview, and I appreciate y'all for giving me that opportunity.
All right, thank you, Ms. Langford. First question, Ms. Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Burr. Good afternoon, Dr. Langford. How can you bring together a diverse, talented group of individuals to form an effective team?
I think that, I've had the privilege of being able to do that a number of different ways. Probably the first and initial learning experience, of course, was being involved in things as a teenager, but then definitely when I was in the Army. You come from all over the nation. You have very different backgrounds, different religious experiences, different ethnicities. I used to have to stand up on the table and sing Rocky Top because I was one of the few from the South. You got made fun of. You learned to deal with it, but you also learned how to grow and put teams together. In my professional capacity now, I think what's most exciting is that we've got so many great, exceptional leaders in the classroom, in our buildings, in our schools as principals, assistant principals, lead educators. And I think we've done a really strong job of building a team-based approach to the work that we do. And so in my current position, what my task is to provide the guidelines for those teams so that they can be innovative. I want them to be able to let ideas flow. I want them to get together and do the very best they can for our kids. That does not, the worst thing that I can do is go in, and I'll be honest, like, I'm such an idea person, I have to be careful because I'll go in and I'll share all my ideas. I've had to learn over the last 5 years that I have to step back and let all the other ideas come out first, because we've got some really, really talented people and they have great ideas. And so you have to hear those ideas while providing the guidelines, because if you can't pay for it and you can't sustain it, then you have to scale back the idea, and it's better to start that on the front end so that you can create something that's sustainable. You also have to get a lot of feedback from all the people that are involved in that decision or that team, because what you have to be really careful of is sometimes in life you need a team needs to build a paper airplane, not the Manhattan Project. And sometimes we can build the Manhattan Project when all we need is a paper airplane. And so I think working together to identify the scale of the operation, the purpose of the team, to communicate, to receive feedback, to work together to build something that's best for, and with the central question that should be asked in everything that we do in education is this best for students, and does it support our faculty and staff?
Mr. Lancaster.
Thank you, Dr. Langford, for being here. I guess you were here anyway, but being here anyway. Mine's a two-part question. First part, what are your ideas towards ensuring that teachers are not only supported, but appreciated from the highest level of leadership? And follow-up to that is, how might you ensure that you are receiving truthful and honest feedback from those on the front lines?
I think, Mr. Lancaster, for the first part, I think presence is probably the most important thing. My team here makes fun of me because I can't tell you the last time I've been in my office. Like, literally, it's probably been 2 or 3 months. I'm usually in a conference room where I'm walking around. I have not been able to be in schools as much as I used to. I would prefer to be in schools at least 2 days a week. So that I can walk around and listen to teachers and listen to principals. I spend probably, in my role now, I spend a significant amount of time talking to principals and listening to them and trying to get feedback. But I like, I will say one of the most shocking things when I moved into my position is I've never really thought of myself as that important or that big of a deal. And when I would walk in teachers' classrooms, it was anxiety inducing at times. And I've done it enough now that I don't think really anybody gets anxious, because, I think what I've tried to do in that instance is leave really positive feedback, take a ton of pictures and put it on our social media and really praise the great things that we see. So I think that praise means a lot, whether it's a note, whether it's an email, whether it's a social media tweet or retweet. I try to also, the great things that I see, it's so exciting now because so many of our schools share so much of what's going on in their buildings and in their schools and lives, that I can retweet and make a comment. That's not the same as the personal interaction, but I think the hardest part with the scale of our district is if you hit 2 schools a day, it takes you a month to hit every school. And you don't want to do I don't like a whirlwind where I do 5 or 6 schools a day unless I absolutely have to. I prefer to be able to walk around and spend time and get to talk and visit and hear. I think that's the most important thing, is you have to be present enough for teachers to feel comfortable enough to share what's going on. I try to be responsive whenever I get an email or a question. I think also, just in terms of support and appreciation, you have to build out a top flight system that rewards teachers for achievement. I think one of the things I'm proudest of that we've been able to do over the last 4 years is increase teacher pay by $8,000. I can tell you that when I started teaching in 1999, I was a first-year teacher in Georgia, and I made more than my mom, who had taught for 18 years. My daughter last year she was a first-year teacher in Sumner County. She tutored, she taught summer school, she worked a lot of extra things for our kids, but she made almost as much as I made as an assistant principal. So we don't, hopefully we can create a support through our benefits package, where we cover family and individual insurance, the things that are added on a lot, and then continue to increase pay. I think also the thing that we hear the most when our teams go out to do recruiting and go interview new candidates to be teachers, it's usually not pay, because most of them are like 22 or 23 and they're on their parents' insurance and they haven't thought about retirement and things like that. It's support. I think that where we are right now, the number one thing that we can do is anything that we can do to support our teachers and principals, because the grind right now is very real and it's tough, and we have to be there to support them in our words, but also in our actions and our deeds through how we pay and support them. In terms of feedback, truthful and honest feedback, I think building relationships with everybody that you can so that they feel comfortable sharing that honest feedback. Honestly, I would say, I know you had that wonderful encounter with your daughter about the dress code. My daughter being a first-year teacher last year, I got lots of feedback on what it was like to be a first-year teacher in the classroom. And I think that, I think having been here long enough to have relationships across the county, I think most teachers and administrators feel comfortable sharing with me what they think, and that allows us, like we try to do surveys and things like that, but then you also want to have that face-to-face conversation to hear the depth and magnitude of everything going on.
All right, next question is from Mr. Gregory, who could not be here. What have you done to help the public understand the needs of your school system?
I think that's an ongoing challenge. I think that our schools do an amazing job of putting out what they need and communicating that to parents and to community leaders and things like that. I think it's something that we really work on hard here. We've built out a pretty substantial Facebook community, Twitter, different things like that to try to communicate what we're doing. We certainly during COVID did frequent Facebook Lives. We've done Sumner Connect to put information out to parents. We're sending millions of messages a year on Remind to increase communication. I think, part of the role of superintendent is to be the person that goes around and champions the schools to chambers of commerce, to Rotary clubs, to realtors groups, to any civic or community organization, because I think the thing is like our schools are best when the communities are united, working together. It's easy in some ways in Sumner County because our schools are built around different communities. So I think that's different than a lot of districts our size, and I think it's why we still think of ourselves as a relatively small district, is the fact that we don't necessarily think about it as a school district of 30,000 students. We think of it as Shackle Island, Hendersonville, Gallatin, Station Camp, White House, Westmoreland, Portland. We think about those communities that are all strong. Liberty Creek now. We think about those communities, but then I think to also be able to champion the district as a whole is an important task for the director of schools. And I think that involves being present, not just in schools and classrooms, but also present in local communities to tell the story of the school district, to celebrate the accomplishments, to really cast praise for the great job that our principals and teachers and students are doing.
All right, Ms. Andrews.
Yes, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Think of a problem brought to you recently. What was the problem? How did you handle it?
I think, probably the one that's most immediate and pressing right now is third grade retention. It's a problem that affects, probably 600 to 800 of our third graders. We're dealing with, the realities of the legislative process. And I think we want to be you want to be cognizant of the fact that we live in a democracy, and this is part of our process, is that legislators deliberate what's best for the state of Tennessee, looking from Memphis to Bristol. That's a challenging and a grueling process. At the same time that, they've got a bunch of new legislators, and it's a new process for them to learn. So being aware of the fact that they have tough decisions that they have to make in Nashville to guide the entire state. We would all like answers yesterday. I would like those answers yesterday, because I hate the fact that I can't give all the answers to the community that I would like. I mean, we had a principals meeting on Tuesday, and our elementary principals desperately want to know the feedback and guidance that we would give them over how we're going to manage the next steps. And I think the challenge of that is that from my perspective is I can't give information that either may change or may not be 100% accurate. I have to say, hold on and wait, but also we will tell you as soon as we know. I think that once we have that information, what we have done is we have prepared everything that we can. We put everything we can into place. I know Ms. Hessen has, and our other teams, Ms. Skinner and some others have shared with y'all what our plans are and what we're trying to do, because it doesn't just affect third grade retention. It affects summer programming. It affects tutoring next year. And so we want to be able to communicate quickly and accurately information. That includes principals and teachers and parents, and we've got to be able to communicate that as quickly as possible. So I think, like we've got our home literacy report that's set to go home. We're sending it out earlier than April 6th because we got the benchmark data back, and we can go ahead and roll that out earlier to parents so that we can empower our principals and teachers to begin to have those conversations with parents. And that's the core, I think, that's the most important part about third grade retention, is creating that two-way dialogue between parents and teachers and principals so that we can make the best decision for that child. But it's queuing up everything that we can do as a team and thinking across the board. It affects special ed, it affects English language learners. There are a whole bunch of different areas that it impacts, even down to custodians and summer programming and things like that. And we have to think broadly and narrowly simultaneously. And we have that queued up, but we just have to wait until we get we can plug in the final details and roll with it.
All right, Mr. Daniels.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us about the most important decision you've made in your current position, and how did you involve the people who would be affected by that decision?
I think, let me clarify that this was not a decision that I made solely by myself, because I don't think truly that there have been very many decisions that I've made. I think leadership works best when we decide together collectively. Now, I'll own responsibility for those decisions, because I think that that's also a very important process of leadership. But I think probably, I could think of several, Mr. Daniels. I think probably the most impactful and important decision that we made was when we decided to stay open during COVID. That was a tough decision. If you remember, we had lots of anxiety in the community from parents, from staff members on the board, in our offices, and it wasn't anything, the last pandemic of scale was during World War I. And, where schools shut down for a significant period of time. And as we know, lots of schools across the country shut down. By opening, we were able to have our elementary kids in school 93% of the time, and our middle and high school kids in 86, 87% of the time. Now, the magnitude of that was, it was amazing, because I think the good that I'll say this, I would never in a million years want to relive those years again. But I think the positive that came out of it is that I think most school districts prior to that time were very siloed. You had your different departments, and you worked like big business did in the 60s or 70s. You had your HR departments, you had your finance departments, you had your instruction departments, you had your special ed pupil services, you had all these different departments. And we only worked together a lot when there was friction, where we bumped into each other. What I think came out of the decision to stay open is that we all had to work together on everything. Like our nurses, one-to-one, and even like me and some others worked to do shot clinics so our employees could feel safe being back. We worked to, we created a virtual school in about a month. We delivered instruction for 9 weeks by the seat of our pants, and then collected feedback and found out from parents, I've got 3 kids and we've got 1 iPad. We got to have more technology. I've got 3 kids in 3 different grade bands or 3 different teachers, and 1 set of assignments came on PDF and needed to be printed, but we don't have any printer ink, and you can't really get out to get any. And we can't even get toilet paper, much less printer ink. We had ones that were using Remind, Class Dojo, a whole bunch of different ways. So when we started, we needed to check on all of our teachers, all of our principals, all of our kids every day. Now, this was not me. I was part of the process. But we found all but about 30 of our kids. And our principals and our attendance office, Keisha Ray and Melanie and their team, they took meals to kids, hot meals. We fed 500 and something thousand meals to the community during that time. Andy Brown's team and our school nutrition team were amazing, but we got feedback from surveys and Google Forms and POSIP and everything else, and it allowed us to meet the needs of our community. We discovered during that process that a significant number of our children receive vital services, whether it's special education services, counseling, food, medical. A lot of the core services that they receive, hot meals, all come through the school day. And when that's taken away, it removes a significant part and support of a child's life. And when we saw that, the most amazing thing happened is we were transformed here in terms of working together. Now it's not uncommon, for the Safe Schools team with Katie Brown and my team in instruction or technology or transportation. Chris Brown and technology have worked with instruction to put thousands of devices in the hands of our kids. That's been the real positive that's come out of it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Hawkins.
Welcome, Dr. Langford.
Thank you.
Describe a significant change you initiated in your district or school, and tell us what evidence you have to show it was a positive change. How did you build support for that change, even in the face of opposition?
I would say our shifts that we've made in ELA. I've stepped back now because by training, other than my 3 years in middle school, I had been in high school my whole career. I still think watching a kindergarten teacher teach a child to read is the closest thing to magic that I can imagine. I have no idea. I mean, it's really, to me, it's the most impressive thing in everything I've done in education, is the gifts that our kindergarten teachers have in accomplishing that. I think that, when I came in, I don't know, I say that to say that I don't know that I would have been as bold with the changes that I made if I had known more about elementary. I heard a lot in the early days that I was a high school person. I also came in as a high school person thinking that my primary task was to address challenges in high school. And what I found as I began to go around the district was that we had a significant need for consistent ELA instruction across the district, especially in K2, K5. That we couldn't address the needs that we had in high school. It wasn't a 9-12 challenge, it was a K-12 challenge. And so, and let me say this, our teachers were working their fingers to the bone. When we collected early data before we started making changes, we found out that on average, for instance, some of our people were spending 3-4 hours every Sunday afternoon with their grade band team preparing units and materials for the next week. Some were working until 5 or 6 o'clock every night. When principals were going into classrooms, they had to try to assess the quantitative and qualitative reading level of the text to make sure it was on grade level. When I sat through my first round of strategic planning meetings that we do every September, every elementary principal that came in said, we need support in ELA. We need a curriculum. Our coordinators in instruction at that time had vetted some the year before, and they said that wit and wisdom was the way to go. And so we started in 3rd grade, the second semester. I learned a lot. Jamie York taught me that you don't order all the books to come to one place. The publishers will ship them to individual schools and not all to one place. As we dug into it more, we began to discern that one of the biggest needs we had was for foundational literacy. Phonics, but more than phonics. Phonics is part of it. But foundational literacy was a huge need for our community. And what we wanted is, when you go to a lot of districts, you'll see, if you're in the affluent school, you'll see materials and resources that you will never see in the less affluent schools. We had a massive demographic shift when I taught in Clayton County. If you went to the southern Clayton County schools, they had cutting edge technology. At Forest Park High School, we had 1 VCR and TV per floor, shared between about 16 to 20 classrooms. When we made the shift to add a strong ELA curriculum with foundational language, what you see now, if you walk in our schools, is if you go to our most economically disadvantaged school or our most affluent school, you'll see the same materials. You'll see the same high level of instruction because we have provided to our teachers the resources that they need to be able to deliver the instruction. Now, it's not like what I think our teachers have found as they've dug into it is they still have to adjust to meet the needs of their kids. They have to ask tough questions. They have to look at the needs of each individual child and adjust it. And that is different across the county because our student populations are different. But what they don't have to do is spend hours and hours and hours and hours looking for materials and trying to put that together. That's hard to do, and to write assessments. As we have progressed with that, we have been able to add in Wilson Foundations, which is our K3 foundational literacy program. It's based on Orton Gillingham. It's the best that there is, I think. And I think we've seen that growth in our K3 students. We've also been able to add in Geodes, which is a decodable reader. It connects so our kids are building knowledge in their regular ELA class. Like, for instance, they may be reading about seasons or the heart or different facets of the human body. And then in Foundations, they're learning sounding out letters, different approaches of foundational literacy. When they go to Geodes, to the decodable reader, they're sounding out and practicing what they've learned in Foundations, but they're doing it while also acquiring knowledge. Because, if you follow literacy research, obviously kids that come from more affluent backgrounds are exposed to more world events. Like, for instance, my kids have been all over the world. They've been, when they were talking about the Puritans in middle school or in high school, they had been to Boston. When I was pastoring in Waycross, Georgia, I took my kids to an FCA football game at the University of Georgia, and only 2 kids in my youth group had ever been to Atlanta. Their world revolved around the city limits of Waycross, Georgia. It's eye-opening for kids to have the same exposure that their kids in different schools have. So that's uniform across the base. Of course, as we began to do the foundational literacy, what we began to discover is instead of discovering dyslexia and things like that in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, we're finding it much, much earlier now. When you can identify that a child has a learning disability early, the ability to help that child learn to read is off the charts. Their growth is amazing. We have a very gifted interventionist at Nanny Berry, and she's been using Wilson Reading System, which is our full, Foundations is what every child receives in K3. Wilson reading is when you demonstrate that you have a challenge, and we're trying to pinpoint what that challenge is. Wilson reading is the way that we address that. So this teacher has taken a child from below kindergarten reading level to 6th grade this school year. That's what happens when you put that in place and you support your teachers. Howard has adopted a co-teaching model to go along with this, and if you look at what they're doing, it's hard to differentiate. Even though they're a title school, it's hard to differentiate what they are accomplishing in reading from other schools that are not title schools. And to be able to go ahead and in quick fashion determine if a kid has dyslexia or another learning disability, it helps us begin to move together EL, special ed, title, everybody work together towards the same purpose with similar materials. It's one of the things, to go back to COVID, it's one of the things like pupil services, special education have been asking for foundational literacy for 15, 20 years. So our ability to be able to do that now is huge, and it's not me, it's not our department, it's everybody working together, because it was a very expensive decision for us to make as a district. In terms of getting feedback from teachers, I think that might have been in the question, and I'll try to wrap up quickly. We tried, especially early on when we were implementing, we got feedback from teachers each 9 weeks, and our team sat around and read through all that feedback. We had step-back meetings with principals, with lead educators, with coordinators, with teachers, to hear and try to make adjustments. We've heard lots of comments from parents, and we try to meet parent needs and communicate. During COVID, we were able to make 5,000 videos to support kids learning at home through our lesson library. We've been able to put Sumner Connect out there to provide supports for parents while they're at home. I hope that got everything.
Mr. Lancaster.
As you know, the nationwide teacher shortage is a huge problem. How have you, or how will you, address teacher satisfaction and attempt to maximize teacher retention?
I think, let me see if I can summarize, because I think I answered part of this earlier, so let me see if I can not just restate that, but reference, I think that we will always, as director of schools and as school board, I think we'll have to work together to continue to have the best pay and benefits package that we can provide to teachers, so that we can draw talented teachers, not just locally, but from around the country. We have done that. In 2019, teachers, I believe, in Macon County were making more than teachers in Sumner County, with a much higher cost of living in Sumner County. Now, over the last couple of years, everybody working together, we've increased teacher pay by $8,000, and that's huge. But, with the governor's initiative through TISA to have we're at $44,100 for starting teacher now. The law requires by 2026 that we have to be at $45,000. We will have to be higher than that to be competitive in Nashville, because, as you know, housing and everything else is really expensive, and to be able to support new teachers and their families moving in, because we're getting lots of wonderful teachers from other states, from California, from New York, from Illinois, from Maryland, all over. It's a very real thing. I think the second part that I think we can really have a quick impact with is the state has authorized us to start Grow Your Own programs. Mr. Ott in HR, Dr. Alexander, Dr. Craighead, several others have been working together, because we had a Grow Your Own interest meeting back in the fall. We had 300 people show up. So part of the teacher shortage is an access to the opportunity to teach. I think that there are a lot of people that are interested in teaching as a career, but historically it's been a very tough profession to get into if you didn't get your teaching certification as an undergraduate. It's really been closed off. The state is starting to give us more ability. We have one of the few in the state where we can do Grow Your Own with CTE teachers. We've got a partnership with Lipscomb, and I believe we're hopefully adding Trevecca and a couple of other schools where we can begin to add teachers more quickly, because we have some teaching assistants that are interested in becoming teachers that we already know, and they've got a lot of experience with our kids. So I think we have to remove every obstacle that we can control to make teaching better and more accessible. I think we have to set the bar for pay and benefits. I think the number one question when we go to recruiting fairs again that we hear is, how are you going to support me? And I think that's a question that we have to think a lot about. Like in my department currently, as possibly as director of schools, working with principals and teachers, is how do we provide constant support by hearing from our teachers what their needs are. For instance, one of the largest needs that our teachers are expressing currently is student behavior. Not that it's bad, just that we have a lot of students that are struggling with emotional issues and anxiety and things like that, and our teachers do not feel fully equipped to address the needs of their students while they're also teaching English or math. So how can we support that? One of the things that we're already doing, if you've ever worked with David Hallman, you'll know, some of you will wait for me to say something funny after that, but David is, he created RT Fisher. He came back and rebuilt RT Fisher, and in the meantime had a lifetime devoted at the high school and middle school level to supporting students. When we sat through strategic planning this year, the thing we heard from almost every principal was, we need help supporting our students. They have profound needs and we need help. So, one of the things that we're currently working on, we're in the process of training 110 teachers, lead educators, coordinators, principals, assistant principals, everyone who's interested across all departments in what's called TCIS. Some of TCIS this is not the restraint part. This is when I walk into a situation and a student is having an anxiety attack, how do I de-escalate that? Most of us, when we went to school, the way things were de-escalated was by having a coach or someone holler at you. That doesn't work. What you need is to feel comfortable and confident and have tools in hand to be able to support that teacher, to be able to support that student. Every teacher that I've ever known or worked with had a deep desire to help their students learn and grow and achieve. And I think while that's not directly connected to teacher retention, I think what we will find, Mr. Lancaster, is that teachers probably won't leave because of pay. They probably won't leave because of our benefits package or things like that. They will leave if they don't feel that we're supporting them and do everything that we can to support them in the classroom. And I think that's a huge, huge avenue for us. There is no silver bullet out there. We've looked, you can't, there is a dramatic shortage right now in counselors. There's a dramatic shortage in mental health support. If we had a blank check and we could write it, we wouldn't be able to find the people to be able to meet the needs of our community right now. So what we have to do instead is work together to find every piece that we can do to help our kids and join hands together to provide that to our teachers, because they are going to be the ones that every day are on the front lines of meeting the needs of our students.
All right, next question comes from Mr. King, who could not be here today. Our district is fiscally dependent upon the county commission. How would you propose gaining their support of the school budget?
I think first thing is to understand all the different pieces. I think the most challenging thing to understand about school financing is that it's very complex. So, for instance, 126 million of our funding comes locally. 168 million comes from the state, and about 13 million, a little bit over 13 million comes from the federal government each year. So we have to be able, in order to develop a budget, we have to be able to work with all those different entities. We are very blessed in Sumner County to have a great group of state legislators who always listen to us and advocate for us to provide more resources for our kids. And I think you'll continue to see that as we move towards TISA. We now have a funding formula that attempts to better meet the needs of it's going to be a huge learning curve, and it will be fraught with some challenges and some issues year one. But at the end of the day, the state has put their money where their mouth is regarding funding schools. It's not perfect, There's a lot of room for growth, and we would always like more, but it's pretty good. Directly with the county commissioner, that was Mr. King's question. One thing is I have a deep understanding of how the budget process works on the county commission side. And it's not easy. I can remember in 2014, I was on the budget committee, and I went in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed that we were going to make a significant number of changes. And what I found is that every department in the county had huge needs, and every one of those needs deserved to be met. How do you look? I mean, I really I feel for Mr. Schoaf as he prepares to lead the budget committee through their first time, because how do you look across the table at different department leaders, whether it's emergency services, whether it's the sheriff, whether it's the schools, whether it's the highway department, because every group that comes before them is going to have profound needs. So I think the way forward, I'll be honest, I've had fairly positive interactions with most of the commissioners that I've talked to so far. And I think that what we will be able to do over time is find common ground. And I think that's the thing that we always have to look for, is where's our common ground. Now, at the same time, as director of schools, I think I would need to be really clear and say that there are very real non-negotiables. We will not accept second best for the students of Sumner County. We will work, we have demonstrated that we will work hand in hand with the Sheriff's Department, with EMA, with EMS, with the Highway Department. We will work hand in hand with everybody. But we have an obligation and a duty to put the very best education in front of every student that we have. And that's a core bedrock thing for me, and I would fight to the death to make sure our kids have everything that they need. And I will do that. But at the same time, I think that we have to, as a society, Dr. Martin Luther King said that if we continue exchanging an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, we will be a nation that is blind and toothless. We can choose to spend the next 3 years throwing rocks and knocking out teeth and taking eyes. Or we can begin to collectively move past that and look each day at 30,000 students, 30,500 students, and say we have a moral obligation and a duty to each of these children. The way that I like to think about it is, I think it was last year, year before, Keisha Ray presented to us and Melanie, and they shared with us that there was a student, a Sumner County student, sleeping with their family in the Walmart parking lot because they could go in, warm up, use the bathroom, and they felt more secure because the lighting was good. We had a parent that asked, we had found out in the pickup line at one of our schools that their car was broken down, and a garage offered to fix their car for free, and they asked at the end of the night if they could lower the car because that's where they slept. And that garage just tells the caliber of people that we have in Sumner County. The man that owned that garage paid for a hotel room for them for 2 nights while he fixed their car. That's the caliber of people that we have in Sumner County. But whenever I get distracted by the noise, I can't help but think of those people. Regardless of what happens here, I'll go home. I've been very blessed, but I have a moral responsibility to those kids, and I take that very seriously. That means I will work with anyone who will better the lives of our kids, and I will stand up against anybody that tries to hurt them.
Ms. Hayes.
So, Dr. Langford, explain how you would develop a school system budget and tell us who you would involve and how you would involve them in the process.
Okay. I think as a principal, budgeting I thought was pretty complicated, but I had a wonderful bookkeeper. Our finance people never get the credit that they deserve. because you don't make things happen in a school or in a district if it's not in the budget. When I was pastoring, I took a class, and the pastor said, the proof of your theology is your church budget. If you don't budget it, if you budget $90,000 for electricity and $3,000 for children's ministry, then you're not serious about children's ministry. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions. What I've learned here, Dr. Phillips, I believe truly will never get the credit that he deserves for his genius with understanding the way budgeting and strategic planning works. He can tell you, if you make this move now, it'll free you up to do this in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or however far you want to go out. I've learned tremendously over, since I didn't get the opportunity as an assistant principal really to work with Dr. Phillips a whole lot. But once I became a principal in 2014, and definitely in 2018 when I came up here, to learn from, I think, one of the best at understanding the way budgeting works. And the way that we do budgeting is pretty much, I think, the way that I would like to continue it, which is, we start off every year budgeting at our level. When you look at the resources that we were entrusted with by the public, it never stops, because you have money, new money comes in. We try to apply for grants and do everything we can to expand the opportunities of our kids. So our budgeting never really stops. But the cycle that we follow is we always start with our principals coming in, and they share with us. We look at their student enrollment and populations. We run a lot of that on ratios because we want to be fair and equitable across the county. I can remember, when I was a kid, if you were on the ridge, equity was defined slightly different. Ours is defined pretty strictly by ratios, and we try to lower those ratios because obviously the more counselors that you have per school, the more teachers that you have per school, the more administrative staff, the more custodial staff, the better that school will run. But given the pool of resources that we have, we try to do the very best, but we start with the schools. I think, it's on my resume. We have shifted the money that goes directly to schools from about $385,000 in 2014 to about $1.5 million currently. That's money that goes directly to the schools, divided up into the different pots. But our schools have, we try to send as much instructional money as we can, because schools have a lot of things. Like, we try to provide a lot of things, but if you're a high school principal, you have to buy things that are amazing sometimes that you sign for, like owl pellets or sharks for dissection. And sometimes you get pregnant sharks, and then you got baby sharks all over the school. Not the song, actual baby sharks. But getting our principals involved, because the scale of our system is massive, and the needs of our elementary principals is quite different than the needs of our middle school and high school principals. So hearing that, a couple years ago, we heard the need from high school principals that they were having to fundraise their communities to death to replace scoreboards and things like that. We were able to push a significant amount of capital to each high school. Then middle schools asked, and now middle schools and elementary schools also receive capital, so they don't have to go out and fundraise as much. I can say as a principal, I stopped doing a school-wide fundraiser because I was able to manage our building level needs with the money that we received. So I think keeping the school and the classroom as the forefront of all of our budgeting decision is the most important thing. And then you step back and say, how do we support that teacher who's delivering instruction to our kids? So then, the process that we follow from there is we meet with each of our departments. And we all go in, we meet with Ms. Brown, and then we go and meet with Dr. Phillips, and we go through and lay out our wants and our needs. We generally get our needs. Occasionally we get our wants. No, I'm kidding. We get most of what we need and want, because usually I say the people that I work with every day, are deeply committed and devoted to the students of Sumner County, and they do the very best job they can. So I think it's a process to hear from our schools, to hear from our departments. I think increasingly hearing from our parents, from our stakeholders. We do our budget presentation and things like that. But I think if we can, I'll try to be more succinct because I've not been talking a long time. But I think any way that we can get our school communities more involved. I've got some thoughts about how we could begin kind of a parent council where each school would have representation, and we'd be able to meet regularly with them to hear what needs are coming from school, because sometimes the needs at a new school are very different from a school that's 45, 50 years old.
All right, next question is another one from Mr. King. Give us an example of when you've changed your mind and taken a different course of action as a result of listening to others.
I feel like I change my mind all the time. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but I learned a long time ago that I have a lot of ideas, most of which I think are spectacular. But when those hit the wall of reality and other people's experience, they're not always the best ideas. So I prefer personally, I joked earlier about I'm not really in my office. It's because I prefer to work around a conference table. When I was a principal, my assistants and whoever else wanted to sit down and deliberate, we made decisions together. I think that's the way. It's hard for me to sometimes, I feel guilty taking credit for a lot of the great things that have happened in the school system, because I don't think really very many of those were my ideas. They were team efforts. And the way that I prefer to work is we identify a problem and we all start throwing out what's the best way to address it. And then we go out and we listen to the people that are going to implement it. Because a lot of times, even I still like to think of myself as being a high school principal, but I'm 5 years removed from being a high school principal. I have to go listen to principals to hear, because the world has changed in 5 years in schools. I have to listen, so we try to get feedback constantly and listen to that feedback. You have to have people around you that are willing to say, I think that's a bad idea, I think this is a better idea. Or I think that's an okay idea, but I think it's better if we do this. And I'm sure I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, because I'm sure, oftentimes feel like my idea is better. But I really feel like, I believe ideas are constantly in negotiation. I believe the work that we do is constantly in negotiation, because the one thing that happens in schools is the ground changes constantly. Sumner County is not the same that it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it won't be the same in 2 years. And we have to adapt our decision making and be open to change our minds.
All right, next question is from Mr. Lacey, who could not be here today. Can you provide an example of what you have done to build/maintain high morale among staff?
I think I'm very relational in the way that I try to connect with our team, our Sumner County team, teachers, principals, custodians, cafeteria workers, maintenance employees, bus drivers, IT workers. I think the thing that I try to do in my current position is speak to everyone that I see, encourage them, thank them routinely for the work that they do, while at the same time, that's on a personal level. I think any time that any employee tries to reach out to talk, I try to make time to hear them and listen, because I love when a teacher reaches out to me and wants to talk about an issue or a concern or an idea. Honestly, right now, we get a lot of ideas that come from teachers. And I think that's really exciting, and I think that boosts morale, when a person sees that they gave an idea and it's implemented across the district. And I think that there's a lot that we can do to try to create more avenues for that to happen. I think it's something we need to be very aware of. I think continuing, I find a lot now, I have the opportunities with a lot of principals when they're working through something. And the one thing is, principals deal with things routinely that there is no textbook answer for. And the biggest thing that I feel like I do to boost morale is listen. And I've learned over the last 5 years to listen more and advise less, because generally they know the best answer for their school. What they want from me is the encouragement to follow what their instinct tells them, or feedback if I think it's a bad idea, or an experience from another school, because I also get to hear across the county different things that are going on.
Mr. Graham?
Dr. Langford, thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir.
What steps would you take to ensure academic success?
I think, Mr. Graham, it starts from the moment a child enters our school building. And I think it's not just what happens, books, classes. We have to make sure that we have a system that, and I'm very thankful for what we've built. Our school day begins somewhere around 5:45 when our bus drivers first fire up the buses, probably earlier, and go and pick students up. We have about, I think, 5,200 breakfasts served each day. We have to take care of the immediate needs of our kids if we're going to have any kind of success. And then I think it's providing, we've talked about mental health support, counseling, whole student approaches. We've got to have all those things. And then I think that we have to have, I'll try to be, Mr. Gray, I'll try to be, this is a big question. I got a lot of thoughts on this. I think that rigor is a word that gets overused a lot, but I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we're providing rigor that challenges and pushes all of our students. There's a big movement in New York City right now. They have adopted curricula for most of the past 20 or 30 years that has mired their schools in mediocrity. They're not moving the needle on literacy. And they did a survey recently of the parents, and the thing the parents said is we do not want you to slack off on our children. We want you to have high expectations and standards for our kids. And I think that we want to have high expectations from pre-K through 12th grade for our kids. We want to have high expectations, high support, high encouragement, and the highest of standards. I think we also owe it to our children to provide them with multiple opportunities to success. Like, I think one of the things that's going to come out in the next couple of years is that high school is going to change pretty dramatically. We've already begun to fill it. We have 30 career paths right now in Sumner County. With that line, we've tried to destroy the line between conversations about college and career. Everybody is on a path for career. Everybody's on a path for post-secondary. It may look different. You might go to lineman school. I might go to TCAT Portland or TCAT Hartsville and complete an advanced manufacturing certification. I might go to Yale. We have students that do all those things. Every one of those things and 1,000 other things. And the question is how do we support that? And so, I think if you look at the curricula that we put in front of our kids every day, the AP offerings that we have, the dual enrollment offerings that we have, the CTE offerings, we are providing wonderful opportunities for our students. I think the challenge for us, the next step for us, is to tie all those things together. One of the things that we're looking at with the money that the governor blessed us with is to add career coaches at each school, because every school has the intention of providing top-level advising and support to students, but there aren't enough hours in the day to give it to the depth and magnitude or to go out and make the connections to provide the opportunities. I think, even for kids that say, I'm going to a 4-year university, I'm going to take every AP class that I can take, I'm going to take every dual enrollment class. I had a student, he was valedictorian in 2018, 28 of his 32 class credits were honors, dual enrollment, or AP. He pushed himself to the edge academically because he wanted the very best. You know, when he went to college, what he had not had the opportunity to do was to do a work study, to job shadow someone. And it took him a while to figure out exactly what he wanted to do. And part of that's college experience. We can't change that. But what we can do is provide students not just the support in the classroom, but also the support and the opportunity to be able to go out and see what different careers do. Because the difference is, if you do go to a 4-year school or a 2-year school, they're going to expect you to have a major and kind of know what you want to do day one. You know, we went through that with my younger daughter. She thought she wanted to be an engineer until she took her first engineering class. But it took her a year to be able to change because of the way the program was laid out. It would have been helpful if she could have gone and job shadowed some engineers and done some different things to determine if that's what she wanted to do. Mr. Graham, specifically on academic achievement, I think it starts in kindergarten, building a strong foundation of literacy and adding with that math literacy also. And I think increasingly openings to, I'm excited in 2 years we look at science curriculum, and that's going to provide more support for our STEM programs, because the jobs, you know, if you look, because I think one of the things that's going to change how we define academic rigor and achievement is the introduction of artificial intelligence. You know, ChatGPT is the worst it will ever be right now, and it's pretty amazing if you play with it. We can try to do what some school districts are doing and ban it, but that won't work. One, kids are wildly resourceful. If you have a teenager, you know just how resourceful they are. But rather than that, how do we harness it? Because our kids are going to enter a workforce in a world with jobs that we can't even imagine yet. So how do we prepare them to not only know things and learn things, but also be able to acquire and utilize knowledge quickly? And that's going to be more than just AP dual enrollment CTE. That's going to be exposure and experience to working in teams, to be able to adapt rapidly on your feet. And it's going to require a lot of conversation with our community partners, with parents, with teachers, with principals, all of us working together.
Mr. Daniels.
Thank you. My question is, describe your experience in developing, implementing, and/or evaluating an instructional program that has improved the educational achievement of students.
I think, so I can be more brief. I'll piggyback off earlier when I talked about our ELA shift. One of the things that I think is troubling nationally that we're trying to address here, and have had some success, is the gap between our student population as a whole and our economically disadvantaged students, our Black, Hispanic, Native American students, our students with disabilities. It's not acceptable for kids to not be more proficient at reading. We cannot settle until we're doing a better job and producing kids that are more literate. And it's not, our teachers are working furiously and deeply and intensely, and they teach well. I challenge anybody in the country to come and look at what goes on in our English classrooms, our reading interventions every day, and I will put our teachers and our principals up against anybody in the country. I think we have the very best. How do we get there is we have to name the challenges and take steps to address it, and we have to be real truthful. There is a gap, but I can say, you know, what's amazing is that across the country, middle school ELA scores have been stagnant for well over a decade. I was looking at the change between 21 and 22 in our test scores. Our 6th grade scores were up overall 14.9%. 11.1 among our Black, Hispanic, Native American students, and 13.1 among our economically disadvantaged students. In 7th grade, 13.5%, 12.2 for Black, Hispanic, Native American, 8.2% for economically disadvantaged students. 8th grade, 5.1 for all of our students, 2.5 Black, Hispanic, Native American students, and 1.5 for economically disadvantaged students. we've got to name that, and we've got to ask tough questions about what supports and interventions do we provide. I think, Mr. Daniels, to answer your question, we built the foundation. Our teachers do amazing work. We've provided the resources and the materials. Some of it is going to take time. We are just now starting to get into middle school, our first group of kids that have had exposure to foundational literacy. In a couple years, we'll have sixth graders that have had foundational literacy from kindergarten, and I expect that we will see a big gain. I think we're just on the early side of it. You know, there's the, you know, sometimes you plant, sometimes you water, sometimes you reap. We've planted a couple years ago. We're watering and nurturing right now. In a couple years, I expect that we will see a big jump because of the work that we've done. But I think in the meantime, we have to name and hold ourselves accountable to see that success. And that requires being very truthful about our data and looking to see what we can do better. I could, you know, in title, I think it was amazing. I think this would probably be the thing I would highlight as the biggest measure of that success, Mr. Daniels, is I had the opportunity to go last week. I think it was last week. They had their big title meeting because they have to put together, each title school has to put together their own budget, and they have some flexibility with the way that they budget their money and how they address the needs of their students. So title schools will look differently in the supports that they provide for their students based on the needs of that student population. Oakmont has different needs than Venus Stewart, and Venus Stewart has different needs than Guild. And so they allocate their resources slightly differently. But one of the things that Ms. Skinner has done over the last couple of years is the first year she focused heavily on family engagement, because there is this awful myth out there that economically disadvantaged students' parents are not interested in their students' education. I want to be really clear, that is not true. That is a myth. What we have found is, you know, Gallatin High School started this a couple years ago with community celebrations. Our title schools are all now doing parental engagement nights. And we're seeing, even during COVID, we're seeing 300, 400, 500 parents at these meetings. So I got the privilege of going to their meetings because they had a baseball theme and they had baseball cards for what they were doing. And what's amazing about what they did is they're moving now from parent engagement to parent empowerment. Like, not just how do we get people out for an event, but how do we take the opportunity when we have people there to empower them to be able to support their students. Because I don't know if you have younger kids, you can usually make it successfully through a math lesson. When your students start taking AP Calculus and AP Statistics, at least for me, that was pretty intimidating. But if you're a parent that's working oftentimes 2 jobs, having tools at your disposal to support your child because you don't have hours to prepare to help them at home with their homework. For us to be able to partner with our parents to provide that support where it's engagement, but even beyond engagement is empowerment, is us beginning to move the needle, not just with the resources that we put out there with our ELA program, but to connect it together into the school community. And, you know, I mentioned Howard earlier. Gene Brown is another one. The work that Gene Brown does is amazing. You know, it started with Keith Parrott dressing up like a mouse and hopping on a motorcycle. But it was way more than Keith Parrott hopping on a motorcycle and dressed like a mouse. He stands out front every morning and greets his kids. John Mann at George Whitten is bilingual. He has a lot of English language learners at his school. He greets his parents in Spanish and English. He knew the first week of school, he knew not only the names of every one of his children, he knew the names of their parents. And so when he can pop into the car and talk to them about their child's reading, when he can share that home literacy report and they built that connection, it helps us go to the next level with our reading. And I think that's the second and third levels of our success that's starting to take root.
Mr. Wise.
You can expound on your answer to this question. I know that goes without saying, you're going to anyway. Would you consider yourself more of a fixer or a sustainer?
Mr. Wise, I'm going to fight the urge to not have a slide deck for you with the 25, 30 slides. You know, it's interesting. At different times in my life, I've been different things. I've been a fixer at times, and I enjoy that. But I think where we are now, we had a principals meeting Tuesday, and you know, it's interesting because during COVID, we shifted almost all of our principal meetings to Zoom. Now, I don't know how y'all are, but there's almost nothing worse than having a Zoom or Team or something like that meeting. It's better than having to have everybody drive here for a quick meeting. So it's great to push out information and have quick conversations, but it's become a celebration almost to just have a principals meeting and have everybody together. And when I looked out at we were in the gym, when I looked out at all the principals gathered together, you know, what I realized is, and I knew this, but when you see it, it really is driven home, is we've got a phenomenal group of principals. You know, we've had 107 go through our training program to be the next generation of assistant principals. We've had 37 that are current assistant principals go through some training and support to move into the principal role. We are really scratching the surface on what we're like. I would die on the hill that we have the best group of leaders from 25 to 45 of any district in the country. We are strong, and we are diverse, and we are talented, and it's going to be exciting to watch. So in that sense, I believe that, you know, for the foreseeable future, if I am your director, I will be a sustainer, because honestly, we have put into place such a wonderful group of leaders. And we're not even talking about the lead educators. We're not talking about coordinators and supervisors and others. Like, we've got a super talented group of leaders. It's weird being 50 and I wake up being the old man in the room when I used to get to be the young leader. But it's exciting to be a sustainer because you get to see the great things that they're going to do. And they are going to move the needle. And it's exciting. So I would say sustainer.
Do you think it's appropriate for school employees to also serve as county commissioners?
Yes, I do. I think I'll just share my personal experience. I think if we look over the history of the county, we've had some wonderful educators that have served on the county commission. I would say for me personally in 2012, you know, when school shut down, I looked around and I've always been one, you can either be part of the problem or you can be part of the solution. You know, I can hop on Facebook and complain, or I can do something to try to change things. And so in 2014, I decided that I would run, or 2012, 2013, I decided that I would run for the county commission. And I very plainly stated, you would never see a piece of my campaign material that didn't talk about the fact that I was a teacher. At the time when I first ran, I was an assistant principal and then a principal. Prior to moving up here, most of my second term on the commission. But I was very transparent with voters that I was a school employee, and they elected me twice. I think that there is a misnomer out there that educators are somehow removed from being citizens of the United States. We pay taxes. We love our communities. We are deeply, deeply engaged in serving our communities, and we deserve to have a voice at the table. For many years in Sumner County, we didn't have much of a voice. I can remember schools shutting down, not just in 2012, but you know, over having diesel fuel for the buses or a number of other things. At some point, everybody deserves to be able to put forward what they believe is best for the community and be transparent about it and let the voters decide. I completely confident in the voters of Sumner County with whichever way they go, and I think we see the voters of Sumner County will say sometimes this is wonderful, and sometimes they will say we've got to step back and reassess and adjust. And I think that we, as citizens in a democracy, we honor that and we live into it. But at the same time, I think it's almost insulting to say that teachers are not active members of the community, because I think we are. And I think we have every right to sit at the table where decisions are made.
Ms. Andrews.
What does your strategic planning process look like to ensure decisions are delivered in a timely manner? Please specify what tools and resources you use, as well as who you involve in the process.
I try to In terms of tools, I think that's probably the easiest place for me to start. You have to make decisions that are data driven, or at least data informed. Sometimes you just have to make gut decisions, but gut decisions need to be made sparingly, and they need to be based off intuition because you've had your feet on the ground and you've listened to the ground. That kind of, like my grandfather was a lifelong farmer, and he could tell you it would rain 3 hours before it rained. He knew when to plant things. I wish I had listened more because I can't do any of that. But he had a sense, but it wasn't just a gut feeling. It was a sense that was born out of years of practice. And you have to balance data with the experience of the people that you have on the ground. Like, for instance, Art Crook is the dean of high school principals because Art has been a high school principal for a long time. There is a lot of wisdom there because he's seen everything. He's heard everything. He's experienced everything. You do well to listen to people with that kind of experience, but you also have to look at the data to see what the data is telling you. So I think that's where you try to get your feel. In terms of the actual strategic planning process, you need as many eyes and hands on it as possible. So I think you always have to, I was a youth pastor at one point, and we had a church board with 26 people on it. I would never advise that to anybody because you never get anything done. What you need initially is a small group that can listen to the needs of a whole bunch of people and then come up with an idea from that data and from listening to all those groups. And then take that idea, build it out a little bit to get a feel for what it is, and then share it out with those groups to get feedback. Like, one of the things that we've talked about, especially since COVID, is how do we make our feedback loop as tight as possible? How, when we make a decision, can we get feedback quickly? Like this year we started, I think it was this year, last year, we started a tactical meeting that brought different departments together that were working on student support. Also elementary, middle, and high school principals, and we rotate those elementary, middle, and high school principals every 9 weeks or semester. And what we found is you've got Andrew Grasty there that is our Assistant Director of Transportation, but you've also got a principal sitting there. It's hard for them to find the time to meet, but they're able to talk about how bus drivers sometimes don't feel supported because we use this system with when a student is disciplined, it takes sometimes a day or two to get back to the bus driver. The bus driver needs to know instantly, I counseled the student and I told him or her to sit on the front seat. The bus driver needs to know that. When we tighten our feedback loops, we get better information out quicker to the people making decisions, because I think, we live in an age, and I think in a school system, we have one central office and 52 schools. So how do we empower schools? You want decisions to be made at the lowest level possible because that's where decisions need to be made, as close to the classroom as possible. Not all decisions can be made there, though, because you have to think about all the schools at the same time as you think about an individual school. Or just like as a principal, you have to think about all the classrooms, not just an individual teacher. So you've got to have feedback loops that are tight, but also let you see the horizon to think through how the decision you make at one school affects everything. Probably, Ms. Andrews, the hardest lesson I learned when I came from being a building principal to here is, as a principal, I profoundly believe you have to make decisions quickly. To be indecisive as a principal is you almost can't overcome it. Because if you will make a mistake as a principal, because principals make 3,000 decisions before 10 a.m. Some of them you get wrong, but when you make a mistake, you can go back and talk to 3 or 4 people and you can rectify that mistake. You can call a couple parents and usually fix it. If you make a mistake here, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to unravel because it's communicated out 50 different places at least. So the biggest transition for me from being a principal to being an assistant director, chief academic officer, is I had to learn to think slower. I have it in me to think quickly, but you have to step back and think about how it affects everything. I've learned, it's another area where I've learned a lot from Dr. Phillips, is you have to be deliberative in your strategic planning to allow more room for more voices, more feedback, and a tight feedback loop.
How would you work with your board to be effective, make good decisions, and be respected as a board by the community?
I think communication is essential and vital. I think being open to talk to each board member. I would hope in your interactions now, if you call and ask me a question or shoot me an email, I'll always tell you the truth as I see it or know it, and if it changes, I'll get back with you. We live in a world where we've got multiple players from the federal government, state government, local, and sometimes things change very quickly. But I will always be available to communicate and talk. I can also say in terms of with the community, I am a team person. I would never, if we make a decision and there's a vote by this board, then that's what we're going to do. I would never be one that goes and says, well, I didn't want to do this, but the school board did. I would never do that to a school board because I honor and respect the process. Once we make a decision, that's our decision, and we're going to carry that out to the best of our ability. Now, if we find out that there's data that suggests it's not a good decision, I would talk to each of you and bring it back, because I think, just in my answer about strategic planning, I think we would want the same thing as a board too. I owe you the truth, and if I see things aren't working, I would bring it back and say, here are things that I think we can change or tweak or do a little bit differently. And I think through communication with our parents, with our community, with our stakeholders, I think tighter feedback loops and the most frequent communication and conversation we can have, that builds trust and respect between the school board and the community. And I think it's something that we've demonstrated, over many years and will continue to demonstrate.
Mr. Graham.
We're getting there. What do you consider to be the most significant outcome of planning that you've been involved with in a school or district?
I think, Mr. Graham, I've talked about this at length, so I'll go quick here, if that's okay. I think it's seeing, I would jump back to our response to COVID. Did we get everything right? Not by a long shot. I never want to repeat that again. I don't think we ever would repeat that again. But if we did, there are about 1 million things I would do differently. But I can say by our commitment to stay in school, by our commitment to support our teachers and our staff. I mean, some of our schools, the custodians look like Ghostbusters. They had like sanitizer they were spraying and everything. But by staying in school, it set the stage. You cannot teach a child to read unless they're physically in the classroom. They have to be able to see their teacher's face, to see how you form words and letters and sounds. And I can't explain, I'm so proud of our teachers and our principals and our leaders for the work that they did there. And I will always think that's one of the most successful things that I was able to be a part of. And to see the way that it brought us together, because I'll be honest, our custodians, our maintenance personnel, and our nurses held us together. I mean, they were unbelievable.
Mr. Wise.
Can you provide an example in your current position that demonstrates your ability to build confidence in the schools?
Yeah, I think, I think what I've always tried to do is be open and transparent and share as frequently as possible. I think, I would say a highlight of that was, all the years that I've had in the public eye in Sumner County, the only thing I've ever been recognized for were Facebook Lives during COVID. The only time I've ever been recognized. And I think the thing was, when I think back on it, I think I answered the question, are we going to have prom? Are we going to have graduation? There are about 2 or 3 of those questions. I believe I answered those questions 35,000 times. But you know what? Like the reality is that was the most pressing question. Because, at the time, I had a junior at home. And she wanted to know if we were going to have prom. She wanted to know, not because she necessarily cared about prom, but because she wanted normalcy. She wanted school. She loved seeing her friends. You know, her group came back together when they were seniors and they said, we don't know what this year is going to hold. We don't know if we'll be able to have a student section. You know, she was in theater. She's like, we don't know if we'll be able to do school plays. We're going to make the very best out of it. And I think that that's what we owe our communities is we're going to make the very best out of it. And I think by being publicly available, whether that's through different phases of multimedia, whether it's in person, wherever we might be, plays, concerts, games, competitions, whatever that might be, is talking to people and telling them the great things and also explaining, not just telling the great things, but explaining the tough decisions that we have to make and why we made them. And I think that instills confidence.
And for our final question is Ms. Hawkins.
Thank you for meeting with us today. Is there something you would like to tell us that is not on your resume?
I feel like I've said almost everything, Ms. Hawkins. I'll close with this. You know, one of the greatest blessings I had today when I walked in was Miss Velma Brinkley at the time was sitting right over here. And she came up and hugged me, told me she loved me. You know, when I was a ninth grader, I was somewhat lazy in the classroom. I had a lot of academic potential, but I coasted on it. And I will never forget, I was underperforming in science. And Miss Brinkley called me into the guidance office at White House High School. And she slid her glasses down on her nose, and she looked at me, and she said, Mr. Langford. And then she reached behind her, and she pulled out her Bible, and she read to me from the Gospel of Luke and said, those to whom much is given, much is expected. And she goes, I do not ever expect to have this conversation with you again. And we never had that conversation again. I've had the great and profound privilege. You know, my three great aunts were school teachers. My great grandmother died when my grandfather was 2. One of my great aunts researched and found a connection through the Daughters of the American Revolution that allowed her to go to Peabody and get a teaching certificate and start teaching in the 1930s. They drove a horse and buggy to Madison Creek from Cottontown. 2 of the sisters would teach and 1 would stay home and take care of the younger siblings. They were a hardscrabble farm family that grew up by busting sod and surviving. But they understood education. You know, now 2 of my cousins, 3 of us have doctorates that came from countless hours of farm labor, but a vision for education. I mentioned this, I went to my first football game when I was 3 days old because my dad was a head football coach at Hendersonville. I grew up with Paul Decker and Eddie Greer and Jimmy Gilmore, Mary Klaus, so many Benny Bills, Merrill Hyde. I grew up with the educational leadership of the last 50 years in Sumner County. And I won't be perfect. I will make mistakes, but I will always own those mistakes. And I will always have a deep love for this school system and each school and each child. Because somewhere there is a child that desperately needs the words that I received from Miss Brinkley or the words that a million other kids have received. Because if you get on Facebook, whenever people start waxing sentimental about their school days, they will always share that there was a teacher that saw them. You know, my daughters, it was fine arts and speech. Their theater teacher and speech coach profoundly impacted their life. You know, for me, it was, you know, Miss Brinkley, Kevin Offit. They pushed me and they challenged me and they encouraged me. And that's what I see for the future of our school district. And I can promise you, I'll never complain about the hours. I'll never complain about the battles. But I will always love the kids and the teachers and the leaders of our county. Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get to interview.
Thank you, Dr. Langford. We really appreciate you being here. So we are adjourned.